Good evening, everybody. I'm Frank Sesno. I'm director of the School of Media and Public Affairs. And as Barbara Porter and I like to say, I'm a recovering journalist. I'm not sure we ever fully recover, and that's a good thing. I would like to thank you all very, very much for being here at a remarkable moment in our history and for a conversation that I hope is instructive to you, to our students at the School of Media and Public Affairs and throughout the university, to those of you who are journalists, and really to the country, because we've got C-SPAN and Facebook Live and a number of other media here. And I think that we will benefit from both hearing from the new White House press secretary at a time of some suspense and drama, and also from hearing from those who are the journalists assigned to the White House, who go there to do their job every day, and from Ari Fleischer, who's a former White House press secretary. So in the room, C-SPAN, our broadcast, that's broadcasting this evening, and as I said, GW Facebook Live. I would like to acknowledge a couple of people very quickly, and to first and foremost, and to start with the 16th president of the George Washington University, Stephen Knapp. Stephen, thank you so much for being here, President Knapp. And Barbara Porter, who is an unshakable friend of SMPA. I'd also like to recognize Lorraine Voles and Aristide Collins, who are leaders at this university. Thank you for being here as well. We are also joined this evening, and I look forward to hearing from him later for his perspective, just before we go to student questions and audience questions for our panelists. When we have our panelists up, Professor Stephen Roberts, who was for years with the New York Times. That's where I met him when we were both covering the Reagan White House. You've covered how many presidents in one form or another? He can't remember. He does not go back to McKinley, which is when White House press first started covering from in the White House, but I look forward to hearing that. I want to thank college Republicans and college Democrats for producing this and presenting this evening with us. So thank you both, college Democrats and Republicans. The fact that this event is presented by SMPA and this university and by college Democrats and college Republicans is a testament to what we're all about and why we're here, which is to create a dynamic, engaging, provocative, curious, and respectful place for discussion and debate. And there is arguably no time in our history, like now, to demonstrate respect. So I would ask that all of you show that respect and join in this conversation as listeners and then as questioners when the time comes. I would also like to thank Jen Halpin and John Perino and the incredible staff at SMPA who've worked so hard to organize this. It looks easy when we all show up. There is an enormous amount of work. So would you join me in just thanking the staff that helped put this together. It has been my pleasure working in Washington to engage bunches of politicians and others and to meet some really, truly remarkable people who are remarkable journalists. And as I mentioned, C-SPAN is covering this, but I have asked the really, truly remarkable Steve Scully to make some opening remarks. You may have seen him on C-SPAN. He's been around for a very long time. He combines the grace of a teacher, because he does that, and the commitment of a teacher, with the commitment and passion of a journalist, and the detachment of someone at C-SPAN. No one can say C-SPAN is partisan. They present it as it happens. So I'd like to let Steve tee up the event, and then I will be out in just a minute. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. I guess this is my mic, so I'll pull that. Thank you, Frank. Let me underscore a couple of things. Respectful, because that's what we want this to be. My dad always said, you learn more from listening rather than shouting or talking. To be respectful of what we're about to do tonight. We want to thank Sean Spicer. I mean, we put this together, Frank put this together literally 2 weeks ago. He called and we thought that this was the right time, and certainly President Knapp, this is the right place, just a few blocks from the White House. And so we're grateful that Sean Spicer is here to kind of tee up the night and then the panel discussion. I want to share with you just two quotes that I pulled for the evening. One is from President John Adams. He said the following: "The liberty of the press is essential to the security of the state." And if you've studied civics, you probably know this from President Thomas Jefferson. Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. And so if you have ever been to the White House, if you walk 50 feet in one direction, you are in the press briefing room, named after James Brady, the White House press secretary to Ronald Reagan. You move another 50 feet, and you're in the Oval Office. And so what tonight is all about is that intersection between the press and the presidency. And so let me welcome Frank Sesno back to the stage, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer, and again, emphasize we're here to listen, we're here to learn. So thank you for being with us, Frank Sesno and White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Sean Spicer, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, how's life?
Real quiet. I was going to look at some kind of online courses or something to occupy my time with while I'm here.
Is this fun?
It is fun. If you love what you do, then it's not really a job. And I think I love doing this. I love being a communicator, and this is the pinnacle of any communicator's job.
Is it fun to run right into the hurricane? To have the controversy and the pushback and the demonstrations and the Saturday briefing?
Well, I don't know that I would call that fun. But I believe that if you believe in something and you're fighting for what you believe in and you're fighting to get it right, then there's an element of fun, I guess you'd say, for it. But I don't look at this as fun. I look at this as a sort of a cause and a movement that you think that you're doing the right thing for. I enjoy it. I wish that, I think anything that you do, you would have more people with you than against you, or a narrative going completely with you than against you. But it's also a challenge, and that's what makes it, as a communicator, if it was all, lollipops and rainbows, that wouldn't make it challenging. What makes it challenging is explaining complex ideas in a way that every American can understand why you're doing what you're doing.
So that's what we'll do in our
Great.
few minutes here, to try to get to some of the ideas that you tried to explain, how it's going and why it's going the way it has. So let's just dive in, all right? And
sure.
Why not? And let's start with what is grabbing, disturbing so much of the country, which is this refugee ban. You're the press secretary and the communications director, so you're really trying to do more than just talk to the media, but also talk to the country and to the world in many ways, and to inform people. This thing was rolled out without the typical briefings that happen for the media, without fact sheets, without background conversations, so the media, when they were doing their job, couldn't issue some of the clarifying information, and therefore there was this enormous sense of uncertainty, fear, chaos, and it's not just a communications issue. I mean, there's a lot else going on. Did that contribute to it? Was that part of the problem? Is that something to fix going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a big difference. This particular case was done in a way that if you're going to announce travel restrictions to protect the country, if you announce them and telegraph them 2 days, 5 hours, whatever, you can undermine the success of the program. I think it was a very unique case in how we had to do it. Because you're right. I mean, normally you would sit there and say, okay, this is the rollout plan. This is when we're going to do it. Here's our surrogates. They're going to be out there.
Did you plan and did you anticipate that there was going to be the kind of chaos that there was? Was that something you wanted to see?
No. Of course we didn't want to see it. I think we've tried. We've held several background briefings right off the bat. I think there was I think a lot of this, to be honest, was blown out of proportion. I mean, I think when people understand the statistics and what's happening, so let me just walk through the TikTok. One, the ban deals with 7 countries that the Obama administration had previously identified as needing further travel restrictions. 2, in the 24-hour period following the implementation of the executive order, 325,000 people came to this country through our airports in 24 hours. 109 of them were stopped for additional screening. 109 out of 325,000.
But I can tell you.
And then you look at the poll that came out today, up to 57% of the American people believe it. So I think what happens is sometimes you can go to these airports, and frankly, it was more of a question of, remember, we're talking 109 people nationwide that came in, that were caught in the midst of the executive order. Hold on. And my point is that when you look at the proportion of that, and what that took. Name me another program that you can get that level of success. I mean, you've got, in terms of its implementation.
I take your point, but 109 people or whatever the number is for sure, but hundreds of people thousands of people were disrupted by it. Google was recalling its employees from around the world. I was at a board meeting of another school where a faculty member was studying, was on sabbatical in Tehran, and they all worried about whether he was going to be able to get out or not. There's been retaliation now by Iran, Iraq. There's much more that happened here than what happened to 107 or 109 people.
Right. And I think, as you saw, by the time that we went through a 24-hour period where the implementation process went through, it all settled down. I mean, it was an initial churn that occurred because of it. But at the end of the day, what was the other option? To rush it out quickly and to telegraph it 5 days so that people could rush into this country and undermine the safety of our nation?
If this was so urgent and you needed to address so urgently keeping people out who would do us harm, and I know you've been asked this before, but for the
right.
explanation to this room, why then not Saudi Arabia, where the hijackers came from who flew into buildings?
And maybe
why
we
not
will,
Pakistan,
and maybe we will expand this, but the bottom line is we started with the 7 countries that had previously been identified, did a 90-day review. Maybe during that 90-day review we find other countries or we take someone off or whatever, but it is a review process. And at the end of the day, it's always, everyone's saying, well, how did you have to go today? Why couldn't you have waited another day? We don't know when the next threat faces this country. We don't know when the next terrorist is going to enter this country. We don't know when the next bomb's going to go off. And the last thing that you want to do is to say, well, we could have done this Saturday, but we waited one more day, or we wanted to roll it out differently, and someone's life got lost. At that point, what do you tell those people? Why didn't you go a day earlier?
What do you say, though, to that Iraqi who translated for the U.S. military for 10 years, who couldn't get in? What do you say to the mother of the Syrian child whose husband or son was murdered in Syria and was looking for refuge in this country? How do you communicate to those people who see a cold shoulder from the United States now?
Well, I think there's a couple things. Number one, you saw one of those individuals was interviewed and said, I support what's going on. I mean, that just, one of the interpreters said, I understand that the United States has to protect its borders first, and I understand this, and it was an inconvenience, but I still support Donald Trump. I think that this idea that everyone's got to be offended. The second thing is, this is our number one priority as a government and as leaders is to protect the 324 million people who live in this country. And so I understand that people may be inconvenienced a little coming into the nation. But this is our nation, our country. Our first and foremost responsibility is to our people. And if people want to come to this country and visit or travel or study, then we welcome them. We've always been a welcoming country. But the idea that we should just have an open door and let people in willy-nilly is ridiculous.
But it hasn't been a completely open door. I mean, there's a really interesting piece that I pulled here, and I was looking through it on what it takes and what it has taken in the past for refugees entering the United States. And there are multiple screenings, multiple interviews, multiple fingerprints.
But
so it's
Frank,
not like
I guess my point,
but at some point, if I may,
yeah.
when you stand there as the communication director and the press secretary, when you talk about an open door and that there haven't been it hasn't been an open door.
I said you don't treat it like an open door. The point is that at some point you've got to look at the families who lose somebody in an attack or in a bombing and say, could we have done more to save them? Could another event be prevented through additional screening? And if the answer is yes, and you didn't do something, then that's shame on us.
One of the things I asked you just a moment ago in terms of, you're rolling out a lot of stuff, whether it's the immigration ban or building the wall or possible tariffs or whatever else has been.
Or bringing back jobs, or cutting down regulation, or instituting a lobbying ban.
Okay,
I mean,
fair enough.
But here's the thing. No, but the point is this, and this is kind of because you want to cover media. It's always the lead is always the perceived negative. How about all of the jobs that he's saving? How about all of the money that he's saving for tax dollars through negotiation
That's a fair point.
I know.
It's a fair point, and I'll come back to that, and I'm going to come back to that with them.
But it's never lead with the positive. It's always lead with the perceived negative.
Well, that is part of the problem. I mean, I actually would agree with you on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And we need to do a better job, and maybe that's why public opinion is so low on sorts of things. But I could actually turn that back on you and say, why did Donald Trump run a campaign that was all built on the negative?
I don't think it was. But again, you have a guy whose slogan is "Make America Great Again." He's out there talking about middle-class workers fighting for their wages, fighting for better health care.
He's talking about carnage on American streets. He's talking about,
making America safer. I mean, again, it's always the negative. What about the positive? What about focusing on the jobs that he's bringing home, the workers that he's fighting for?
That's fair enough, and that is the marketplace of ideas. That's where you live as a communications director and the press secretary. It's what they do as journalists and how they have to sift through it all. The question I was going to come back to, though, is with all these things, negative, positive, whatever they are, ambitious and complicated, as you roll them out, will you be communicating more completely with the media for the kinds of information they need, or do you think they're not necessary in this?
Oh, no, 100%. Look, I think over the course of this weekend, we held at least 2 background briefings for reporters. We've brought them into every meeting. And I think if you ask, I know Jeff represents both Reuters and as the president of the White House Correspondents Association, I think you can ask him, you should ask him, how much access have we given them previous to the Obama administration? I think we have shown an abundance of access and trying to get the press involved. I know they always want more. That's Jeff's job. He does a great job of advocating for it. But I think that we have shown a willingness to engage with the press and to bring them, and every morning the schedule or the meetings that the president have, we bring the pool in. He is engaged with them. We have shown a tremendous willingness to engage with the press. But I think that it's not this binary choice, them or not. We posted, for the first time ever, we debuted the weekly address on Facebook Live today. I think we ended up with like 11 million views right off that alone. And I think that one of the things that this president in particular is through the various social media accounts, is somewhere in the 50 million plus now, where he can reach individuals and take a message directly to them. The press plays a very healthy role in a democracy, no question about it. But they're not the only game in town anymore.
So I'm really glad to hear you say that, and I want to ask you. So you say the press plays a healthy role. The president says he's got a running war with the press. Steve Bannon told the New York Times the media should be embarrassed and humiliated and keep its mouth shut and just listen for a while. Do you think the media should keep its mouth shut? Is that their job?
No, I think, well, they can certainly write. But I think that that was a joke.
Should they keep their mouth shut?
No, look, I think that what Steve was getting at is that if people, it's kind of like the exchange you and I just had a second ago, where if you actually listen to a lot of what's happening, if you focus on some of the, look, I'm all for, and I said this in a briefing last Monday, that if we're wrong, call it out. If you think that, but there is never, I mean, everything, you take this national security thing, for an entire National Security Council. The identical language is in the 2017 stand-up of national security.
I want to ask you about that.
Hold on.
I want to come back.
But I want to stay. Entire headlines on one network today that talked about how we're pulling out the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and downgrading them. That is just, it's wrong, it's insulting, and it's just, I mean, the idea of calling it journalism is pathetic.
Well, let me come back to that, and I will in a minute, but I want to stay on Steve Bannon. Steve said the media should feel embarrassed, humiliated, and keep its mouth shut. He said the media are the opposition party. He said the media has zero integrity, zero intelligence, and no hard work. Is that showing respect for the media?
That's, I think Steve's position is very clear on what he thinks of the media.
Is your position Steve's position?
No. I'm the press secretary. Steve was sharing his view of the media, and I think after you seeing some of the things that have been covered the way they have, I understand it. And he has a right to his opinion, as all of us do. But I think that when you see, Steve has worked really hard with the president, both during the campaign, the transition, to implement some really great ideas and policies that I think are helping Americans. He understands and fights for the working class Americans out there who haven't had their voices heard. And I think a lot of times when you pick up the paper or stare up at the TV and you see the headlines or the chyrons, and you realize that they're not even being straight, it is unbelievably disappointing.
You just shared a place where you disagree with him. I'd like to ask you about...
No, I didn't say, you asked me if my view was his view. I'm not disagreeing that he's got a point. I'm saying that that's his view.
You're good at this. But if that's what he believes and you don't believe it, that would... I'm not trying to create a conflict, but that my observation would be...
I'm not trying to say there is one either.
But
my point is that...
I'm sure you're not. But so let me ask you this. These are really complicated issues across the board. Kellyanne Conway, in an interview with the Washington Post, observed that leaders need people around them who can say no, who can say, this is not a good idea, this isn't working. Have you said that to Donald Trump?
Absolutely.
About what?
I'm not going to tell you about the private conversations I have with the president.
About what general
He'll ask
topic?
me my opinion all the time on whether we should do something or not. I'll share my opinion with him, and then he makes a decision. My job is to provide him with my best counsel as well as everyone else, Kellyanne, Steve, Reince Priebus, Jared Kushner, Hope Hicks. We provide our opinions with him. He's the president. He ultimately decides, and then our job is to execute his decision.
Word is that you were ordered out on Saturday after the inaugural to complain or to observe, or whatever verb you want to use, about the size of the crowds. Did you say, no, I'm not doing that?
No, if I said no, I did not say no, of course not. The president asked me to, we created a strategy on how to deal with the current media cycle that was going on, and I implemented it.
Do you regret that?
I'm a forward thinker.
I take that to be a yes?
No, I think that you can look back on everything. I probably should have taken questions that day. You know, when we woke up that Saturday, we had an amazing inaugural. I think the president's speech was phenomenal. I was really proud of the way that what he communicated to the American people that he wanted to do and the vision that he wanted to enact. And I think it was unbelievably disappointing to wake up and see some of the focus where it was. So that wasn't the media cycle that we wanted to have in the issue topic, because I think he had done such an amazing job and it was such an amazing day for him and his family. But I believe, look, I look at every event that I do and I go back. Today's briefing, the first thing I did is I go back, we gather with the team. What issues did we do well? Where do we have to clean up? What do we have to tighten up? I think that regardless of the job that you do, if you don't go back and reflect, can I do that better? It doesn't matter what you do. If you write a paper for a class and you go back, if you don't take that feedback and say, I could have constructed this better, I could have made this argument better, I should have proofread, whatever it is. But I think self-reflection and self-critique, as well as asking others to do the same, you know, obviously I've you know, looked at my suit choice and, you know, made some changes there. But so, you know, I get plenty of fashion tips now based on Saturday. So in that respect, absolutely.
I have a question from a student that I'd like to share with you, Zoe Spielvogel. And she asked, if you were asked by President Trump or other members of the administration to make a statement you knew to be untrue, how would you respond to the president? Would you still make the statement?
If it was demonstrably false, no. I would explain to the president that here's why this doesn't make sense.
Well, weren't the inaugural crowds demonstrably false? Not the worldwide things.
But that's, again, you know, and I wish I could sit here and pull the exact phraseology out, but what I said at that time was in person and viewership. I said the audience was, and it still is. Here's the thing that's so funny about this, Frank. 16.9 million people watched it on CNN.com alone. 4.1 million people watched it on Twitter, live streamed it on Twitter. And the sites go on and on and on. Then 31 people watched it according to Nielsen. What numbers did, hold on, just let me answer the question.
You weren't making that completely crystal clear in that briefing, though.
Okay, I think I did. I think if you look at the statement where I said the audience size, in person and whatever it was, and then when I said it on Monday, I added it up again. Show me the numbers that show that viewership wasn't at an all-time high. I can show you that gets us to the, you know, to a number that no one can come close to. And yet, again, this goes back to what I said at the beginning. Where's the default? It's always, no, you didn't do this, you couldn't do this.
But that goes with the job.
No.
That goes with the job.
But again, no, I'm fine, I'm fine.
When I covered the White House, you cover a presidential speech and you say, here's what he said. Part of that story is, here's what he didn't say.
Fair enough.
People parse your words.
And I
That's what comes with the
sure,
territory,
understand.
Right? People parse your words.
I understand that. But tell me where I was wrong. The numbers add up into the 50, 60, 70 million, depending on if you keep counting the sites, how many people watched it. Show me another number from another inauguration that is greater than that. The default that you presume and everyone else in that briefing room was, I'm wrong until I prove them otherwise.
No, the default was that you were talking about the crowd on the ground.
No, but
right.
Okay, but that's not what I said. I said audience. Look, your facial gesture. I mean, you're
Shame on me for facial gestures. I won't do that again.
No, but
I promise. I
smile. There you go. I like that one.
All right. Let's try this. Let's try this.
I
this isn't
that
for
was
me.
A smile. That's a good one. I like that.
I'm glad you do.
There you go.
It's all about, So David Axelrod wrote this piece on CNN this morning. I woke up this morning, he wrote, as an alternative fact. In justifying the appointment of Steve Bannon, he writes to the President's Chief of Strategist to the National Security Council, Trump spokesman Sean Spicer cited my role in the Obama White House as a precedent. Spicer said, I and Press Secretary Robert Gibbs attended classified national security meetings, quote, all the time. This is simply not true, he wrote. I was not a member of the committee. I did not speak or participate. I sat on the sidelines as a silent observer with Gibbs because we'd be called upon publicly to discuss the President's decision. He says he was not active and you misrepresented it. Your response?
By his own admission, he attended briefings.
But he was not on the National Council.
Okay, so let's get this straight. So he wasn't a part, according to his statement, he was not a member of the National Security Council, but he attended them. So what did we do? We actually put it in paper and said that Steve's going to be able to attend them. We were transparent about it. And now we're being criticized because we actually did what they didn't do.
No, I'm not criticizing.
The most transparent administration in history didn't have him listed as a member of the National Security Council. He attended them. And then we actually said, hey, if we're going to have one of the people go in and out of meetings, they should be on the piece of paper. And so for us actually being open, honest, and transparent, we're getting criticized from the most transparent administration in history that didn't list him going in and out of meetings unless media reports reported him, which is where it came from.
I'm a little confused here in terms of whether he's attending or he's on the council, and isn't there a difference?
Well, he has the ability to go in and out of the meetings. The idea is that instead of having someone float in and out without anybody knowing, we would list the people who would be attending attending. He is listed as being able to attend. There are 4 people that can attend the meetings.
What kind of relationship do you want with the press corps?
An honest one.
What does that mean?
It means that they've got to do their job. I understand it, and I truly believe this. I think the press is part of a healthy democracy. That's what separates our country from so many around the world. I traveled the world when I was the assistant U.S. trade rep, and you'd go into some countries and watch how they interacted with the media. And some days I liked it, but it was, it was what makes our country great. You've got, far left, far right, independent, freelance people, media papers, online blogs. It's a beautiful thing about our country. You can say what you want. But I also don't want to just let facts get thrown away and get stories written and, when I'm up there, I'm a liar. When they do it, it's a correction at the bottom. And they go, oh, sorry, we didn't call for comment, or what we meant was. I think that there is an unbelievable double standard. When the administration doesn't fully explain something, we're liars and we're misleading, we have no integrity. When they do it, they put this story has been updated at the bottom.
Well, there's a difference between an error that needs to be corrected and a statement from a public official which is supposed to be, and you want to be true, right? You want to be judged by your truth and credibility.
And I would assume that a journalist would like to be truthful as well.
Well, of course, everybody does, but
sure.
I'm not saying that there isn't bad reporting. There is. I'm not saying that there aren't slants. There are. I am not saying there aren't errors. But we talk about the media like it's a singular. The word is plural and covers a vast range of media. So what kind of relationship do you want with media, and do you embrace media that you view as critical?
Absolutely. I would go to the briefing room every day.
Is CNN being frozen out?
No.
Is CNN for the last couple of weeks, as I understand it, has asked for a guest, for example, on their Sunday talk show and has gotten nothing.
But I think there's a big difference between, they've had questions. Jim Acosta, despite some of the stuff that he's done, got a question in the Monday briefing.
What do you mean, despite some of the stuff?
I think he misrepresented the facts of the press briefing at Trump Tower. Not just misled. I think he was completely, I don't want to use certain words. I would say that he misled viewers tremendously.
Well, let me just say, for our television audience and others, Jim Acosta is here, and when he's up here, I'll ask him.
Fair enough.
I just want to make it clear that he's going to have a chance to respond for himself.
He should, because look, so there's 2 questions. One is, they aren't being frozen out. They got to ask questions, but I'm not.
But is there retaliation?
No, there's not retaliation, but I'm not going to sit around and engage with people who have no desire to actually get something right. In the case of Jim, at the Trump Tower press conference, at the end of the press conference, he twice interrupted the president-elect of the United States. I went up to Jim at the end of that press conference, after it was over, after the president-elect had gone up in the elevator, and told him that I thought his behavior was unacceptable, and it was. And it was rude, and it was disrespectful. Jim told me that he went off on a rant 3 or 4 times. We had an exchange. And at the end, I told him, I said, if you behave like that again, we will have you removed, like if you're going to act like a protester. Jim then went on air and said, in the middle of the press conference, I went over to him and said, if he continues to ask tough questions, he'll be removed. I never said that. That's not what... You did. I'll pull the quote for you, Jim.
All right. So we're gonna have a full
but my
conversation.
point is
but
that,
here, my point to you is this, and the question is very simple. You are going to have tough reporters in that press room.
They should be tough.
Then they are going to ask tough reporters of the president, and if the president is not going to acknowledge them, and you're not going to work with them,
hold on, I just said I
no,
acknowledged them.
I understand. This goes to the core of whether and how you're working with independent, accredited.
Okay, so let's stop.
Journalists
Let's stop.
from a variety of perspectives, right?
On Monday, I briefed for 90 minutes, okay? I took, I don't know, what was it, 50-something odd questions. NBC, ABC, I don't know how many, there were 49 seats in there. The room's been packed every day with another, you can ask Jeff for the numbers. I don't know what they were along the sides or whatever, but it's packed. I was there for almost 70 minutes today. I took questions from far-left organizations, quote-unquote mainstream organizations, a Christian broadcast network, a foreign. I mean, at some point, I get it that everyone thinks that they're entitled to a question, but I mean, I was there. We did 2 background briefings this weekend. CNN was represented in both meetings. I mean, I'm not sure where this sense of entitlement comes, that they get a question, they get a seat. At some point, I don't know, where this sense of media entitlement comes from. My job is to make sure that we're communicating effectively, efficiently. We've gone above and beyond to make sure that reporters get access, get information, that they're briefed, that we do calls. And it's, and so, I get it that everybody wants something, but I think that we have been extremely generous with our time and access.
Let me pose the question slightly differently. I mentioned to you earlier some of the comments from Steve Bannon about this being an opposition, that the media are an opposition party, that they have zero integrity, intelligence, and all the rest. Certainly some of the comments from the president himself, that this is the most dishonest group of people, that he can imagine. The director of the Committee to Protect Journalists, Joel Simon, said recently, and I'm quoting him here, this kind of speech not only undermines the work of the media in this country, it emboldens autocratic leaders around the world. These leaders like Putin in Russia and Erdogan in Turkey have consolidated power by marginalizing independent media. We can't allow that to happen in the United States. Will you make a commitment now and here that as White House Press Secretary and Communication Director, you will not be party to efforts to marginalize, and I'll add the word, demonize independent media?
What do you mean by independent media? You mean like networks and?
I mean,
I guess my question is, give me an example of what we have done to even to bring up the question.
Well, I just cited what Joel
I
Simon
understand,
said,
but right, so it's a nice fluffy statement. Explain to me, give me one example of how we've done that.
Well, when the President of the United States goes to the CIA and stands there and says to people who are combating terrorism around the world that the enemy essentially is this row of dishonest people, and this is the president who has sworn to uphold the Constitution, including the First Amendment, with a snarky press. Thomas Jefferson thought it was a snarky press. That undermines faith and confidence, it seems to me, in the institution of the media. Not the individuals, but the institution. Don't you see how that's damaging? Don't you see how that's
at some point, though, there's an obligation of the media to get the facts right.
I couldn't agree more.
But where's the self... I guess it's always
Sean,
about...
I agree with that.
Okay.
I also agree that you have every right and responsibility when something's wrong to point that out. I got calls when I was bureau chief at CNN from White House press secretaries screaming at me because we got something wrong, and then we had to figure out whether we did or not. That's different than an ongoing running attack on the media as an institution. Is it not?
Well, and I think that by and large, when people consistently get things wrong, we have an obligation to make sure that people get the facts right. I mean, I just cited one. We spent an entire weekend talking about the Director of National Intelligence and the Joint Chiefs of Staff being downgraded from the National Security Council. 100% false. I called bureaus, I called reporters, and it was like, well, yeah, I guess you're right. None of them admitted to even reading the executive order, or excuse me, the order standing up the NSC. At some point, it's always what we need to do. At some point, I think there's a bit of reflection that the media needs to do to figure out if they're getting basic facts right. The other day, by the way, just to give you an example, the story that came out about the briefing the day after about what was going on, it said, early Saturday morning, Sean Spicer shows up to the White House to unpack boxes. I didn't bring a single box into the White House until Sunday afternoon. Now, I know that sounds like a simple and petty fact, but if you can't get something as simple like that right, then it shows that how much are you really trying to get the fact right. The basic facts of many of these stories have unbelievable errors in them.
I mean, we could go back and forth on this all night, and I don't want to do that, but those simple basic facts apply both ways. Here's a list of the enemy, perhaps, the Washington Post published it, President Trump's first 7 days of false claims, inaccurate statements, and exaggerations. I'm sure you saw that, too.
Yes.
And there's some pretty basic facts there that he didn't get right. So,
but again, I guess my question is, we're not, I've said it, I said it from the briefing room last Monday, we're not perfect. We're not going to get everything right. But there's a big difference between constantly having a negative mindset about everything's what we got wrong, what we didn't do right, as opposed to, at some point, what did he get done in his first week? How many jobs did he save? How much tax dollars did he save? How many foreign leaders did he reset relationships with? But it's never about the good. The default is consistently about the bad. And again, there's this idea, the press should be skeptical. It's healthy. It's part of what they do. But there's a big difference between a skeptical press that says, show it to me, and the default of always being negative.
I know you need to go in just a couple of minutes, so I want to button this up and just do a couple things and then say thank you. What would your recipe be for changing that default position to the negative while still playing the role of adversary and holding power to account?
Well, I don't think it's an adversarial role. I don't think you go in saying, I'm going to be, I think that the idea...
Respectful adversary.
Right, but again, I don't even look at it that way. My job is to provide the information. If someone wants to get it right, and I think that there's a whole host of reporters that will say, if they're taking the time to work through a story, we've provided sources with them, we've provided background, and again, a lot of times we'll say, hey, can you hold off an hour on that? We think we can get it right for you. I think reporters that try to do their job well, and there are a number of them, that we work with them and try to get that story right. So my job is to figure out if people want to have a relationship where we're giving them facts, they're reporting them out. And again, I get it. There's analysis that can go on where they brought in an expert on this or that and says, our analysis shows the following. That's totally what's supposed to happen. But the idea is that too many journalists have crossed the line becoming reporters to becoming opinion writers, where they start talking about facts that they, the outcomes that they assume will happen, as opposed to an analysis that has been proven or shown by an outside expert or a think tank or some kind of academia. So I look at this purely as my job is to help facilitate the flow of information out, but to make sure that that flow, once it gets through the media, is done in a way that is accurate.
A couple of things before we let you go. White House press briefing room and White House presence on the White House grounds. Been there since McKinley. Know there was some discussion. They're there for now. They're there to stay?
For now.
They're there to stay?
That's not my decision to make. I mean, for right now, I think we're working well in the briefing room.
Do you want them there? Do you think having them on the premises is a good thing?
On the premises, sure. But I think there's a difference.
In the White
right
House.
Now, I mean, my question is the first thing.
I want to know how we're defining on the premises.
Let me answer the question. The first day I get there, I took a tour, and I'm walking through, and they say, I kept hearing report after report, look at how cramped we are in here. So we looked at a couple options. Right now, we're not planning on doing anything. But the idea is the reporters love to tell you how cramped they are, and then we talk about additional space. It's like, well, we don't want to move. Okay, well, so I get hit for talking about, hey, there's a couple potential places that we could move the briefing room to allow more seats. We can have additional space. Nothing's been decided. I have a healthy relationship with the Correspondents Association. I've told Jeff and others that we would have a meeting if we ever had ideas to do this. Nothing's changing, but we thought outside the box initially and said, hey, and I talked to Jeff and his team about potential options that we could do, ways to expand the number of journalists that get in there, ways to mix it up a little. We're trying to bring in more voices, not less.
President Trump going to go to the White House Correspondents Association?
I don't know. We're 6 days in. We really haven't gotten
Traditions are good.
I understand that, but that shouldn't, I mean, the idea that that's a priority.
I'm not saying it's a priority. My God, it's not a priority given what's going on in the world. All right? It's just that we're chatting here,
I know, but I just think that, of all of the things that are going on in the world, worrying about a dinner in April.
Right. It's just about, and maybe this is where we conclude.
That'd be great.
The relationship.
I don't know that I need to do a briefing tomorrow.
That's okay. No, it's not. Do the briefing. It's not where I want to be on that one. What is the relationship that this president wants to have with this press corps in its range, diversity, and skepticism?
Look, I think this, in terms of not just his relationship with the press, with the American people, I think this president's committed to showing people through, showing a lot of this through action, indeed. And I think when you look at how he's treated the press corps so far, we've brought them into most major meetings. We've given him access to, we brought the press up front on Air Force One, which is something that I understand isn't done that. I mean, we have tried to go above and beyond, and we're going to continue to do that. The irony of a lot of the questions you're asking me is, I think when you look at the deeds that we've done the last couple of weeks, both in terms of briefings and in access, you know, Jeff's job is to advocate for as much as possible, and as I said earlier, he does a phenomenal job of doing that on behalf of his brethren in the briefing room and as part of the association. But I think when you compare to what we've done with others in the past, I think we've done a very good job. And so it's ironic in a way that when you're asking about this, you look at what we've actually done since he's been inaugurated, and I think it's been above and beyond.
What last thought would you like to leave this room and our audience with?
Well, I would go back to what I just said. I think the president is deeply committed to making this country a better place, to helping lift up Americans' lives, to lowering their health care costs. He really cares deeply about this. And I think you can see already he's a man of action. You can disagree with his agenda. I get that. That's what makes this country so amazing. But at the end of the day, please don't question his motives. He truly cares about making this country better for every single American and uniting us. And I think that as we continue to watch him in the next weeks, months, and years, I hope people give him a chance to show that. Because when he brings these people in to meet with him, as he did throughout the transition in the first couple weeks, it's amazing to watch these individuals walk out of a meeting who've never met him before, have never interacted with him before. It is usually a very, very different impression when they understand how much he cares and what's in his heart.
The world that you're dealing with and the world that they're dealing with is a world of instant information, instant opinion, constant conversation through social media and all the rest. It makes communicating these things so much more difficult. I really want to thank you for coming over here and spending some time and taking my snarky questions and resolving all of this.
You still got it.
Categorically, yeah, right? And I hope you'll come back and join us again and engage the debate frontally like this.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. And before you go, I mean, this one small little thing. What is this business about chewing gum and swallowing 20 pieces of gum a day?
Of all the habits that anyone could have, I like cinnamon gum. Guilty.
I'm going to look for some correlation there with the rest of the world, but I'm not sure we'll find it. Sean, thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'm going to ask our panel to come down and join me here. And we will segue into the next part of this conversation. So, and why don't you sit there, just wherever. It doesn't matter. Just sit, just wherever. Go ahead, Jeff. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Carol Lee with the Wall Street Journal, the former president of the White House Correspondents Association. Jim Acosta, who already has been introduced. With CNN, Ari Fleischer, former press secretary to George W. Bush, and with years of experience on the Hill. Hadass Gold, who is an alumna of ours from the School of Media and Public Affairs, and now the media correspondent, media critic with Politico, and Jeff Mason, who's also been introduced to you as the president of the White House Correspondents Association now and from Reuters. Well, fair is fair, Jim. You get first shot at that.
Now, why are you saying that, Frank? I think we heard some alternative facts there regarding that press conference at Trump Tower. I just pulled up the clip from media. You heard Sean Spicer there say that he told me, or I said that he told me that I would be thrown out if I tried to ask a tough question. Not true. Here's the quote. This is what I said on CNN following the news conference. Sean Spicer, the incoming press secretary, did say to me that if I were to do that again as an interrupt, I was going to be thrown out of this press conference. Nowhere in there did I say, if I tried to ask a tough question, would I be thrown out of the press conference, that he said that. That is an alternative fact.
I've been there, and we've all been there in that press conference, and it's a very volatile mix.
Yeah.
As you look back on that now, did you go beyond where you should have gone, standing up, interrupting, asserting yourself? Was that over the top, Jim?
Let me answer it by, if I could answer that in a paragraph and not a sentence.
Short paragraph.
Short paragraph. I'll do my best. Keep in mind, this press conference happened shortly after CNN broke the story that during an intelligence briefing that the intelligence community leaders were giving the president-elect, that they gave him another presentation, a 2-page dossier, that detailed some information that the Russian government may have about the president-elect. And the concern that was being passed along to the president-elect from the intelligence community was that it was possible that the Russians might have information that they could use to blackmail him or hold him over a barrel. And CNN reported on the existence of that story. That was a true story. That was not a fake story. That actually happened, because we know the intelligence community later said, yes, we did do this.
Correct.
And so, my job going into that press conference was to ask a question about all of this, obviously, because it was highly important and it was very relevant at that time, because we were very close to this new administration getting going. What happened during that press conference was you saw Sean Spicer, then the vice president-elect, and then the president-elect all come out with this talking point that CNN was engaging in fake news. They lumped us together with...
Because you broke the story.
Because we broke the story. They lumped us together with BuzzFeed, which went a step further than CNN did. It reported on some of the details. There was
Posted the document.
Posted the 30 or some odd page memo that was the basis for that 2-page dossier. CNN did not report the details in that 30 some odd page memo because those were unsubstantiated claims and so forth. So when President-elect Trump kept calling us fake news, I thought it was only right that we get a chance to ask him the question. And the question was, and there was not only the question about this presentation, it was whether or not, and this was the question I wanted to ask, was whether or not any of his associates had any contacts with the Russian government during the course of that campaign.
But he did not recognize you.
But he did not recognize you.
And he was not going to recognize you.
He was
and
waving
you stood, you got to your feet, and you interrupted, and you asserted, and you asked anyway.
But just to be completely clear, if you look at the videotape, I did not get up on my feet. I was sitting on the edge of my seat, and I was sort of doing this, saying I'd like to ask this question. And he finally said, no, I'm not going to take your question. You are fake news. And I stopped. I wasn't trying to have the last word, but I was trying to be persistent, Frank. And if anybody goes back and looks at White House correspondence over the years, from Sam Donaldson to Dan Rather, even Lynn Sweet, who works for the Chicago Sun-Times, Carol and Jeff can attest to this. There have been plenty of times where she's shouted out during press conferences to get Barack Obama to answer a question.
Carol, if you're not recognized, would you assert your question anyway? I mean, what do you make of this as a colleague, as a reporter, as a competitor, and as the former president of the White House Correspondents Association?
I think that your reporters are completely it's totally in bounds to shout a question if they're not being called on. That happens all of the time.
At a news conference.
At a news conference, it's interesting to watch this president versus President Obama. President Obama would come to a press conference, he would have a list of names, there would be a line, there was another couple names under there, he could choose whether or not to go to those people, and it was very methodical and calculated. And this president is a little bit different. And even if you look at the briefings by Sean Spicer versus briefings, and Ari can talk to this, they're very different. They're going out there and over there, and who's that, and he doesn't know, and it's rapid and it moves, and it creates an atmosphere in which it's not only appropriate, but it's also encouraged to be more aggressive and ask without being called on.
How did George W. Bush do it? How did you do it when you were choreographing all of this?
Well, first of all, let me just say I'm glad you all recognize now how much you love and miss George W. Bush.
And you too are.
So, Ari, is that a reliable applause line?
That
Never had to
poncho
take it out
incident.
until this moment. Times are changing. Look, I think if I wanted to be Machiavellian about this, if I wanted to make it look like things are going better for my side of the podium and terrible on the press side of the podium, I would never call on anybody. I would let you guys scream and shout and
That's been
yell
done.
and have a
That's been
cacophony of
done.
noise, because you know what? The public doesn't like it.
No, they hate it.
Right.
I've been in the middle of that. It's awful.
So my point here is, if you want to have a respectful process, it's actually very respectful to have the president do what George Bush did and what Barack Obama did, frankly, and what Donald Trump was trying to do, with all due respect, which is call on a reporter by name, and the reporter answers the question.
How did W do it?
I would write up a list of the reporters to call on.
But there was no list that day.
But it
There's
doesn't
no-
matter if the president
okay,
is calling on people,
Right.
the president calls on people. And this should be a respectful, orderly process. If your name is called on, you ask a question. If your name is not called on, with all due respect, you don't shout for the right to get a question over somebody who is not shouting a question.
When you put
and that's
those-
how I did it in the briefing room as well.
When you did it, when you put those names on the list, did you put people on the list who were favorable or that you liked, and keep people off the list who made you uncomfortable or you thought were unfair?
All reporters love George Bush. And
What page in your history book is that?
I would. Exactly. Thank you, Frank. I would make up a list for him of reporters to call on in the mainstream media, and I picked no favorites. It would be ABC, NBC. Actually, back then, we always would begin with a senior wire reporter, because we were a traditional establishment White House, and we followed those rules. So it would be AP and Reuters, and then we would spread it out. Now, what I would also do, one of the secrets of the White House, is there's some 750 reporters credentialed to cover the White House, and there's really 20, 25 mainstream reporters who are the ones who show up all the time. There are some wacko birds who show up every day to cover the White House. So our first big news conference in the East Room, I made the list for the president with a seating chart of the reporters he should call directly in front of him: ABC, NBC, AP, Reuters. Then on the right side, far right to where the president was standing, I made a list of where those reporters were, and I called it Siberia. And I told the president, whatever you do, don't call on any reporters from Siberia, because the press corps will understand this. At one of Bush's first news conferences in the briefing room, he called on Les Kinsolving. And that became an interesting question.
Jeff, and I do want to mention this, Carol's got to work and is going to have to slip out in a little bit, so I want to get back to you a bunch before we lose you. But as the current president of the White House Correspondents Association, is there a protocol? Is there something that you, as the, and Carol, jump in, as the White House Correspondents Association, feel should govern both decorum and insistence from the press corps, recognizing that, yes, you have a job to do, but as Ari rightly points out, you've got a pretty lousy rating and approval and support among the public. So you got some things to balance there. But decorum?
I will tell you that I had a meeting with Sean not long after that press conference, not because of that press conference, but to discuss the issue of briefing room, of whether the press corps would stay in the briefing room. And during that meeting, when he brought up the press conference, my message to him on behalf of the Correspondents Association was that we would find it unacceptable in all cases for a reporter to be thrown out. And that message, I think, came across loud and clear.
What do you think?
Well, in terms of, I think I would fully stand by that. I don't think any of us would find it acceptable for a reporter to be thrown out of a press conference. In terms of decorum, there are certain rules. They're not written down, but there are ways in which the press corps conducts itself when the president is doing an event. For instance, there was one time when President Obama was speaking in the Rose Garden and a reporter yelled to interrupt him in the middle of his statement. And that's the kind of thing that I
That's
think
over the edge.
the press corps would all agree that that's not what you do. You can shout a question to him at the end, but we don't interrupt the president in the middle of an event.
Let's talk for a few minutes, and Carol, let's start this off with you, because I really want to make sure we hear from you here before you have to leave. What really matters here, folks, is the credibility and the value of the information coming from the White House. What really matters is whether the American public is properly and fully and accurately informed. You heard Sean disputing, some of the elements of the falsehoods or not, and where they're coming from and all of that. How are you approaching covering this president? Is this president different than previous presidents in terms of his approach to information, and to the media, and how do you as a reporter there deal with it if it is?
I guess I'd say a couple things. I've only covered Obama and this president, and there's a lot of, with President Trump, there's a lot of like fire, or smoke, and you're kind of trying to sift through it. And in terms of the bombastic language about the media and, or the opposition and all of this. But I will say that if you do, I agreed with Sean in this, if you pare it back, and maybe Jeff will correct me, I hope not, the access that we've had to this president has been very traditional and very,
traditional.
Yes, in the sense that, and actually even more so than President Obama towards the end, meaning, we're sitting there and everything, there's a pool spray, the pool is brought in. At one point, Trump was like, get him back in here. We want to, take a photo of this in the Oval Office, and everyone's scrambling. And like, there is this sense that he likes having us, a button away.
Careful about talking about buttons, okay?
So in
Make sure we
that-
got the right button there, that's all.
In that sense, it's interesting, but it's really traditional, but it's also really interesting to see how they've followed that from one administration to the next.
So you're saying that you have tradition, despite all the yelling and screaming that's out there, you've had good access to the new president. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think
Jeff?
so.
I would agree with that.
Yeah,
I mean-
and even to the extent of the Obama people figured out how to set us up in an event so that we couldn't get to the president to ask a question when he was walking out. They caught onto that a little late, like after a year in. And the Trump people haven't yet, maybe they will now. And I was able to ask the president a question on his way out about a phone call that he had with Prime Minister of Israel. And that stopped a long time ago in the Obama administration. So there's that. And then if I could just say one other thing that is different is he's doing all of this stuff, so making policies, and we don't get that information for a while. And I know that Sean said, well, we didn't want to do it 5 days in advance, so we didn't brief them. Well, there's a difference. That's a kind of a false choice, right? You can still brief the press, and we're all grown-ups, and we understand embargoes and all of this
put it on
at
embargo.
the time of when something is happening. And so the inability for us, it's not that no one wants to get it wrong, we all have to write our stories, but if you don't have the information about what is actually happening in policy statements, it makes our jobs harder, it makes the message harder, people don't understand it, and we're more likely to get it wrong or have it half-baked and not fully formed. And so there's some growing pains there.
Hadass, as the media critic writing about this, does Sean Spicer have a point?
I think so.
That the media are disposed first, the first, stop is negativity, and that they are very much disposed against this president?
Right. I mean, listen, I'm never one who wants the media to be labeled as the opposition party and somebody to be against, and or I clearly want them to be in the White House. I do think, though, that when Steve Bannon made the quote that the media should shut up, a lot of people cut off the "and listen" portion of that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important because, as the media saw, we clearly got it wrong when it came to the election. And I do think a part of that was you could go to the data, you could go to the fact that reporters stay in New York and D.C. And I do think that in the first, it's hard to believe it's only been 7 days since the inauguration, you do have to sit back a little bit. But there is a lot of things that the media can kick and scream about. What Carol was talking about, the executive orders, is that they're not even posted, like we don't even get the actual text of them, correct, until a few hours after they're announced or signed. I've seen reporters zoom in on the pictures of when Trump will hold it up what he signed in order to read what he's actually signing. And that's a huge departure just from tradition, but also just if we're getting things wrong, or you guys are getting things wrong about policy, I wonder if part of that is because you're just not even getting...
Well, there's a difference between policy and perspective. And I think what Sean is saying, and Jeff, why don't you chime in on this, and then, all right, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is that the negativity of the media is paired with their attitude toward Donald Trump.
Sean made a point that why is the media always focusing on the negative? And what went through my head as he was saying that is it's the media's job to report the news. And it's our job to report what is the newsiest lead or news of the day. There's been a lot of news in the last week. And if Sean sees that as negative, that's his right to see it that way. But it's not our job to say, let's write about the job proposal because that's a positive headline for the Trump administration. It's our job to look at what he's doing and report the news. The biggest news of this weekend was that refugee order, and that's dominated the news. And I'm sure that has been a negative story for them because there's been a lot of demonstration and a lot of negative reaction.
But isn't the point, can you do more than one thing at a time? Can you report more than one story at a time?
Well, of course you can. I mean, look at my newswire. Reuters writes about a zillion different things related to the Trump administration.
What's changed with this president as far as you're concerned?
What's changed in terms of what?
In terms of how the media are going to cover him and whether there's a fundamental change in the equation.
You know, I think I think we have to just do our jobs, and we do our jobs whether it's a president who is sort of has a negative tone towards the media or somebody who's less so. I mean, honestly, there was tension with the Obama administration. There is tension now with the Trump administration. There was tension with the Clinton campaign. There would have been tension with a President Clinton if she had won. But that tension is healthy and normal and going to continue.
Does it matter at all that public support and trust in the media is at an all-time low?
Sure. I mean, I think the media has to pay attention to that. So is it just doing your job, glossing over some other deeper problem that needs to be addressed at the same time? I think that...
Carol, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. I'm so sorry we got squeezed with time. Will you come back another time and be with us?
Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you so much.
I think that the solution goes hand in hand with the problem you raise. I think if the media reports accurately, that will boost the credibility of the reporting and the news organizations that you're referring to.
All right, I know you want to jump in.
Well, I think you're putting your finger now on the biggest issue and the biggest problem, which has changed. And that is over the last 2 decades, the press has lost the trust of the American people. And there are many, many reasons for it, but it's profound, it's fundamental. I think reporters acknowledge it, but they're hopeless to do anything about it.
They're helpless to do anything about it?
Helpless and hopeless.
Helpless and
to do anything about it, frankly. I brought some props. Let me show you something. When George Bush won re-election in 2004, front page of the New York Times, the most sacred space in journalism, the front page on what's arguably the most important day for political life, an election, their giant banner headline for Bush was Bush celebrates victory. Here's the front page for President Obama when he won in 2008. Giant front page, Obama, it says, and underneath it, it says racial barrier falls in decisive victory. Here's the front page when Donald Trump won. Democrats, students, and foreign allies face the reality of Trump presidency. Grief and glee. And you wonder why Donald Trump thinks that the New York Times is biased and unfair against him. Why are their headlines for Bush and Obama so neutral? And this is the tenor and the tone of the top editors on the most sacred space where they make very calculated decisions about what gets on the front page. And then it's compounded when you look at how the press is doing. And I say this with sadness as somebody who started on Capitol Hill as a press secretary in 1983 and wants nothing more than the New York Times and other papers that I still get for home delivery to be absolutely money that I can take to the bank. But here's what Gallup found in September of 2016. American trust and confidence in the mass media to report the news fully, fairly, and accurately has dropped to its lowest level in polling history. And here's the problem for the press. Only 14% of Republicans have faith that the press will tell the news fully, fairly, and accurately. Only 30% of independents, so 70% of independents say they won't, and only 51% of Democrats. Young people, people 18 to 49, only 26% do. Here's what the Pew Research Center found in November of 2016, just a couple months ago. They asked voters to grade the parties, the press, and the pollsters. 35% of people gave Trump an F. 21% of the people gave Hillary Clinton an F. 30% give the Republican Party an F, 28% the Democratic Party an F. 38% give the press an F, even more than Donald Trump an F. The press has lost too much of the trust of the public. And the problem you're going to have is the more you say our solution is just to be tough on Trump, because Trump does things that are offensive, that are beyond tradition, so we're going to be hard-nosed on Trump, you're only going to tell Republicans and many independents the press is out to get them.
Jim,
So you become an arm of just one party, and that's the Democratic Party.
Jim, I want to get your response to this, but I have said that if a U.S. airline...
I didn't interrupt for a long time there.
I'll call on you in just a minute. All right. But if a U.S. airline had the approval rating that the media have got, they'd be flying empty airplanes and staring bankruptcy in the face.
Yeah.
When you go out on the lawn, when CNN thinks about how it's connecting to the larger public, do you think about that? And how do you win back the public?
I think that is a great question, and it's a profound one for this time that we're in. But I do want to respond a little bit to what Ari was saying, and I'm going to answer your question. I want to ask the people here in this audience, who got the most airtime during the Republican primaries? Donald Trump got the most airtime during the Republican primaries. Andrew Tyndall, who measures the number of minutes each candidate gets in the evening newscasts, and individual reporters, by the way, just came out the other day, and you know what he found? Donald Trump got twice as much airtime on the evening newscast as Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, and did he characterize positive or negative?
Well,
because it was overwhelmingly negative.
I would say a lot of it was negative, but
it was
Mostly
overwhelming.
because what he was saying was so crazy, you make him look bad.
But let me ask you this: did we say that Mexican immigrants are rapists and bringing crime into this country? Did we in the news media refer to women as fat pigs? Did we in the news media say that it was okay to grab a woman by her privates? Did we in the news media say that John McCain is not a war hero? Did we in the news media say that you could go out on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody on the street and get away with it? No. Donald Trump said those things, Ari. And the reason why he generated a lot of negative news coverage is because of the things that he said during the course of this campaign. And let me ask you this. What are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to avoid the things that are said by the Republican frontrunner during the course of a campaign? Are we supposed to overlook the outrageous and insensitive things that he says during the course of a campaign and just focus on these policy papers that they're handing out?
No.
And just scale our coverage and just weight it in that direction? Is that what we're supposed to do? Or are we supposed to look at the totality of that individual who is running for the highest office of the land, the person who wants to be the most powerful person in the world? I would submit to you that, yes, our coverage of Donald Trump was excessive at times during the primaries,
and overly negative.
And I think it was to his benefit. I think it was to the detriment of the other Republicans in that field. But at the same time, with that kind of coverage, you're going to get great scrutiny. And there was a press conference at the end of May at Trump Tower, Frank, where I asked Donald Trump at that time, why is it that you can't seem to handle the scrutiny that comes with President of the United States? And that's when he referred to me as a real beauty. You know, that was one of his first attacks on the news media. And then during the course of the campaign, Frank, we were called dishonest, disgusting, liars, scum, the worst, and thieves and crooks, and the list goes on and on.
And he banned outlets.
Jim, and so my point is that
and we're going to come back to how you fix your own reputation.
My point is that different kind of president, maybe a different kind of rule book.
Let me let everybody else respond to this, and then I do want to come back because I think the part of this question, and it's baked in, is, and the reason that Trump's criticisms have the resonance that they do is so much of the country agrees with him. And that is a crisis for journalism, no matter who's in the White House.
And I will tell you that.
Jim, hold.
Okay, go ahead.
Nobody is telling you don't cover the offensive things he says. Of course you should. So don't set up a straw man that doesn't exist. But at the same token, here's what you have to stop doing, and I say this respectfully. At the president's then candidate Trump's nomination speech in Cleveland, Chuck Todd reported it was extraordinarily dark of NBC. Scott Pelley of CBS, it was vengeful. George Stephanopoulos, it painted a dark picture of America. Your network then took a poll, CNN did, and it found that 75% of the viewers thought the speech was a good speech and they liked what he had to say.
Which we reported.
You did. But my point here is what not to do. report the offensive things he says, report the good things he does, but stop telling the American people what conclusions to reach. We're smart enough ourselves to reach those conclusions ourselves.
I agree with that.
We don't need the press to think for us.
I agree with that. And
Now, hold
you know,
on. So that was the nomination speech.
Sure.
President Trump then wins, and the press goes into shock. Oh my, and none of us saw this coming. We've got to learn lessons. We're going to learn lessons. Here comes his inauguration speech. The New York Times, a dark vision, strikingly glim. Washington Post, apocalyptic terms. LA Times, unusually combative. And then we find out another poll is taken, a Politico poll. 65% liked what he said about America first.
Let me invite...
The press keeps missing what Donald Trump is
Let me invite
about.
Hadass and Jeff into this conversation. Is this part of the problem? That we've become an overly interpretive
Yes.
media?
I mean, and the thing is, a lot of the, Ari wasn't citing the quotes from the anchors, but I did a piece on a lot of the anchors and how they reacted. And it's, it's this analysis bleeding in with the news coverage, which we see all over the media now where, it doesn't switch from like MSNBC or Fox News doesn't suddenly switch its chyron when there's an opinion person on. There's not like a flag going up. And I think that's probably contributed to the decline in the trust in the media. If you look at the rise in opinion shows and the decline of the trust in the media, I do have to say that the media did very well in the 2016 election. CNN, I think, had $1 billion in profit or something. The ratings were up for everybody, even after the election. Subscriptions have gone up. But I want to go back to this point where I think what Ari is trying to get at is that the media tends to kind of miss the story because maybe we're not doing a good enough job of talking to people. And I did a profile of this woman, Selena Zito. She is now a CNN contributor. And she was writing, and she lives out in the suburbs of Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh. She kept writing these stories during the campaign, like a bar full of Pennsylvania voters, independents, Democrats, really liked Donald Trump's nomination speech. And everybody was mocking her. Everybody, I mean the DC, New York, Acela Quarter was mocking her, being like, oh, that's not, but these polls say that he's going to lose. And then look what happened. She was right, and now she's being hired by CNN and all these. And I think she said that a large part of it was she was just living amongst these people and actually talking to them.
Jeff, Reuters comes at this in a very different way, and as does the Associated Press for the most part. Or am I wrong? Is this kind of interpretive, were your stories written about dark speeches and apocalyptic views of America, or do you leave a lot of the adjectives out and let others deal with that?
Well, I can't speak for all of Reuters, but one reason I've stayed with Reuters for 16 years is that it's a company that is committed to writing the news straight.
Is there a problem with putting these many adjectives into copy, do you think?
I don't know, Frank. I think what I would like to say is the media has a responsibility to report the facts. I think consumers also have consumers of news, and media could make this easier. But consumers of news also have to pay attention to where they're getting their news and figuring out whether it's a news program, a news publication, or not. And I think Hadass hit it the nail on the head when she said it's sometimes hard to tell when you're watching a program on a various network whether it's actually a news program or whether it's an opinion program.
Because you can get news from some of those programs.
Of course you can.
So let me turn back to Jim, which
Sure.
is where I started this question.
Yeah.
Since you're getting picked on tonight, why stop now?
That's
right?
okay. That's all right.
And in a few minutes, I'm going to open it up to your questions. I'm going to ask Professor Steve Roberts to lead off with some observations from the conversation tonight, though, before we do that, because he has been a correspondent and a student of our political coverage and White House coverage in particular for such a long time. This is a perilous moment, it seems to me. It's a very perilous moment. We have a disruptive president who does not acknowledge many of the conventions of Washington, D.C. He came here to drain the swamp, and he's making changes. Some of them are very jolting, shocking, concerning, angering. That's why we've got demonstrations. We've got leaders around the world who are criticizing him. But the media isn't trusted either. So who should the public turn to? How will the public know what is real and what is fact and where to start from? If we can't be informed, how do we make an informed decision? CNN has had a cast of thousands, it seems, over the course of this campaign.
Yeah.
Sometimes putting you, a journalist, side by side with somebody who frankly, for either side, is a propagandist. The public can be confused by this, and we have these kinds of numbers. What should be done, Jim? Or how do you think about this?
This is the way I think about it. And we're sitting at George Washington University. I seem to recall the founding fathers talking about self-evident truths. Self-evident truths are truths that we know are true. We know them to be true. If you show the inauguration of Donald Trump, an overhead aerial picture of the crowd for Donald Trump's inauguration, and you put it next to Barack Obama's crowd size for the inauguration, everybody in this room and Ari Fleischer can tell us which crowd is larger. Barack Obama's inauguration. You had the President of the United States on his first full day in office go to the CIA and say that the news media was once again coming out to get him, and that he had 1 million to 1.5 million people down on the mall watching the inauguration. It's not true. And then Sean Spicer came out and berated the news media. So this is my point. This is my point. It is up to each and every one of us to determine what the truth is as consumers of the news. The President of the United States does not get to decide what the truth is, what is true.
How does CNN regain the trust of its viewers?
But Frank,
how does the media regain the trust of the public, Jim? That's the question.
Okay, I understand that. But we get to decide what the truth is. Not we the media, we the people. And that is important, Frank. I don't think that can be lost in any of this. And consumers out there of news media can decide where they can turn for their news. Now, you're asking me what does CNN do?
What does CNN, yes.
I think what CNN has to do, and we've heard this recently from our news president, Jeff Zucker. Hadass was interested in this topic. You guys were talking about it with Sean Spicer. You know, is CNN being frozen out of interviews and so forth? I don't know the answer to that question, but what Jeff has said is that we're not in the business of access journalism. We're in the business of doing journalism. And that means, and as you know, Frank, because you worked at CNN in Washington, it is about developing news stories. That's how we pursue the truth. I get on the phone, I call my sources.
But Jim, it's much more complicated than that. It's much more complicated than that. What stories? How do you approach them? How do you frame them? How do you present them?
Sure.
Who are the voices in them? Where do they start? Where do they stop? If it's just Washington talking to Washington or New York talking to New York, we don't get much variety.
Right.
We're not listening and asking a real diversity.
I don't think the crisis right now is about the news media. Okay. I think the crisis right now is about the truth. And we are going to be in dogged pursuit of the truth no matter what happens to us, Frank. And forgive me if I sound like I'm getting up on my high horse. You asked Sean Spicer, are you going to throw them out of the White House? They can throw us out of the White House. They can kick us down the street. We'll set up our trucks on Pennsylvania Avenue. We'll do the exact same stories every day. It does not matter what they do because we're here to do our job. That's all we're doing, Frank, is doing our job. And guess what? Being out on the campaign trail for a year as I went to every one of these rallies. To hear the leading Republican candidate go after the news media day in and day out. You want to ask the hard questions. Ask this of Sean Spicer the next time you get a chance. Did that erode the public's trust any in the news media? To have the Republican candidate who's on day in and day out going after the news media, saying we're the dishonest news media, the disgusting news media. His crowds were chanting CNN sucks and so forth, to the delight of him and his campaign and his followers. I think that has a corrosive effect also.
One of the things that's concerning, and Jeff, I'll ask you this question, then I'm going to invite Professor Roberts to offer his thoughts. Something that was very concerning during the campaign is that many journalists who were covering the President of the United States suddenly felt that they needed to have personal security because they felt endangered. Is that something that you've talked to the press secretary about? Are you concerned about the physical safety of journalists now doing a job that we all took for granted for so long?
Well, I'm concerned if journalists had to do that, for sure. But that's not something I've had a discussion with Sean about.
You've not represented that?
It hasn't come up. Mm-hmm. I mean, the truth is...
we did have security out on the campaign trail.
But, I mean, it's important to add, especially for the audience here who may not know kind of how the White House press corps works. The campaign, covering a campaign and covering a White House are very, very different.
I know. I totally understand that.
I know you know.
I was just wondering whether it had come up in any capacity in your conversation.
Well, I think the context is important. The White House press corps, for better or worse, and in many cases for worse, when we're traveling with the president are in a bubble.
Totally. Yeah.
So, and we have a Secret Service agent with us. So I don't think it's an apples for apples comparison, what we'll be facing now versus what
Steve
we faced
Roberts,
on the campaign.
you've been listening to this conversation this evening and probably restraining yourself. Start off, and then students and others in the audience, if you'd like to make your way to this microphone, that will be the place where we'll take your questions. What are your reflections, thoughts?
Well, is this on? Look, first thing is that I think we owe Sean Spicer a debt of gratitude for coming here and in the belly of the beast, knowing this was a very unfriendly audience. So I give
it was
him
a pretty friendly audience.
I give him a lot of credit for doing that. I think one of the most important things he said that none of you have mentioned was he said on social media, Donald Trump now has 50 million followers, and, quote, to the press, "You're not the only game in town anymore." And one of the key variables here in understanding the role of the press is the fact that Barack Obama before him and now Donald Trump has his own broadcasting network. He has the TBN. He has the Trump Broadcasting Network, and he has 50 million followers, and it's a whole lot more people who watch CNN. And the fact is that that is a basic truth about today's media environment. The implications for the mainstream media is twofold. One is he doesn't need us in the way. When you and I covered the Reagan White House, on a basic level, even in the Bush White House, the president needed the press to be the transmission belt, the delivery system for the president's ideas. Donald Trump, in a basic way, does not need the press in anything like the way George Bush or Ronald Reagan did.
I disagree.
Well, I'm telling you what he thinks. What he thinks is
I
he doesn't
disagree
need
that
it.
he thinks that as well.
Well,
Steve, why don't you,
but let me just finish one more point.
Okay.
I think because he believes he doesn't need the press, he is therefore free, as Jim said, to engage in alternative truth, to decide for himself what truth is. When Spicer was asked about the question of the votes and how can the president assert that he actually won the popular vote, Sean Spicer said, the president believes that.
That's right.
Belief is not truth.
That's right.
And belief...
There is no widespread voter fraud in this
And
country.
so I think part of the landscape we're dealing with is a president who has this enormous ability to reach directly to the public and who believes that he can decide for himself what is true. So therefore, what does that mean for the mainstream press? I think it means, as you said to him, the default has to be more aggressive than ever because he has more power to control what people learn than ever. So when the New York Times uses a headline that says Trump lies, a headline, I worked for the New York Times for 25 years. I never saw a headline like that.
It would have been inconceivable. Yeah.
Inconceivable. But why is it justified? It's justified because you have a president with so much more power to circumvent the media and so much more power to define truth in his own way. Therefore, the mainstream media has to be, the default has to be. Spicer complained, the default is being negative. It has to be. That has to be the default because otherwise the ability of the White House to totally overwhelm the press, I think, is enormous.
Jeff, you want to respond to this?
Just the first part, which is what I disagreed with, and I think you made some excellent points. But I think that Twitter does not get you on the evening news in the Oval Office signing an executive order. It does not. I was in the Oval Office on Friday in the pool spray. We call it a spray when the 13-member or larger pool goes somewhere to take pictures and ask questions of the president. I was in that spray on Friday, and the president decided instead of sitting in the traditional spot when you're with a foreign leader, they usually sit in a chair together at the sort of edge of the couches that you've all seen pictures of the Oval. And he decided that day to stand with Theresa May in front of the bust of Winston Churchill to make a point. And as we were walking in, he realized that there was a lamp in the way of the shot. And so President Trump walked over to the lamp and started to move it, and then asked one of his aides to please move the lamp. That wasn't done in advance. It wasn't preset. It wasn't pre-thought. It was the President of the United States realizing, I want a better picture of myself to go on national news.
Well,
Did all the hidden microphones fall out when he moved it? By any chance?
He might have been an amateur politician, but no one ever accused him of being an amateur TV star.
Well, and I agree with you,
and he knew this very well.
His television background is showing, and I think that is an example of how I don't think that you're entirely correct when you say he doesn't need us. You're right that he has a way of getting to a broad message with his Twitter account. There's no question about that. And he has used it very effectively. He's not the only one who's ever done that, but he has done it very effectively. But that doesn't mean that they don't want media coverage of what he's doing.
Let me bring Hadass and Ari quickly into this.
I'll let the students, but one final word on your point. You're absolutely right about the trust in the media, but the attacks on the media did not start with Donald Trump.
No.
No. You have had 20 years or more of repeated attacks by Republicans and conservatives on the media. In fact, in the 1964 election, reporters covering Barry Goldwater, the Goldwater press team gave out buttons for the press corps saying, liberal media elite. So that was 50 years ago. So there has been a long history of attempts to undermine the credibility.
I have my own red baseball cap that says, annoy the media, re-elect Bush.
Yeah.
From 1992. I'd like to let you guys quickly chime in and then go to our question.
One really quick point that I think, yes, is true. Trump can go around and use Twitter, and we would all cover all of his tweets. Trump himself is, sometimes people describe it, he's kind of trapped in like the late 80s. He still very much cares about how he's covered, and he cares about the coverage on the evening newscast. And he himself is an obsessive consumer of the media. He still takes phone calls with Joe Scarborough when he's in high-level meetings at any point in time. He watches Fox and Friends. He watches Morning Joe. So you have to keep in mind, what the president cares about a lot is the media. So that's why the media still matters. And I think that's probably, if anything, it's almost a protection for the media that we're still going to get access and still have access to the White House because he himself cares about
Ari,
it.
I want to make one other point very quickly and then turn it to you and then to the question. It's also about what Sean and I were talking about before. When the White House puts out fact sheets and background information, it allows the mainstream media, at least presumably, to incorporate more information in their coverage so that the public can have a better understanding of what is going on. At the end of the day, it's not just about Morning Joe or anybody else and opinions and charges and countercharges. We actually need to inform the public about where they're going to war or what their taxes are going to do or how this latest executive order is going to translate out. So isn't that a need for mainstream media, or is that not required now either, do you think?
No, look, I think it'd be very helpful and in the White House's interest to do some traditional things like put out the fact sheets, give embargoed briefings, give reporters tips so they can have faster, smarter stories as soon as the news takes place. But this is secondary. Secondary, because you're missing the person you're covering. The person you're covering is the CEO of a privately held company who became a billionaire, who is used to doing things his way. Action-oriented CEO. He is not a traditional politician who knows how to pucker his lips, to do everything the political way, to have his staff rush out with fact sheets and distribute it the way it's always been done, despite the fact that that's
Or to be
helpful.
held accountable for what he does.
You're missing the bigger story, that what Trump has done this last week has been a blizzard of action. The same way a CEO who goes in to take over a company, disrupt the way it's traditionally been done, and make change would do.
Of course, this isn't a company.
That's the way.
Isn't that the...
But you're missing the mentality of the president.
No, I get the mentality of the president.
My point is, he was elected in his mind to change Washington, not to do things the traditional way. So me as a traditionalist, yes, do the fact sheets, help the press more, do those things. But you're missing the bigger story of why Donald Trump has done a blizzard of executive actions, because that's what he thinks his job is.
We'll spend about 20 minutes with some questions here and then let everybody get on their way.
Great.
Go ahead.
Thanks, everybody. My name is Scott Nover. I'm the editor of Mediafile, which is a media reporting and criticism site based here at GW. So my question for all of you is, in 2017, with Donald Trump and his repeated disregards for press freedom and his more or less misunderstanding of the role of the free press, is it the job of independent or of individual journalists to both report stories and be advocates for the free press? Are journalists overreaching when they're serving in an advocacy role, protecting their First Amendment freedoms?
And why don't we do this as much as possible, kind of lightning round-like, so we can get in as many questions, because I see lots of people there. So
Yeah.
let's have somebody go after that.
I mean, I think we are advocates for the free press when we do our job properly. And I don't think that it interferes at all with what we do if we're advocates for the free press. And just to Steve's point about having a big megaphone, CNN has 26 million Facebook friends, 31 million Twitter followers. Donald Trump, 19 million Facebook friends, 22 million Twitter followers. So, you know, we can go toe for toe when it comes to Twitter followers and Facebook friends. But very quickly, we're all advocates for what we do by doing what we do on a daily basis. Absolutely.
I'd like to take that one as well because and where did you go? I'm an elected president of a board of journalists that represent the White House Press Corps. And our job is to advocate. And I wear two hats. Sometimes when I'm in Sean Spicer's office, I wear my WHCA hat, White House Correspondents Association hat, and sometimes I'll take it off and then just wear I'm a reporter now and I'd like some information for a story or for my own organization, and that's okay. It's completely our job to push for.
For you it is.
Yeah.
But for individual reporters covering the White House, is it okay to have both of those hats if they're not, elected in the WHCA?
Well, I think Jim just answered that. He said, yes.
I think the answer is yes.
Okay, next.
Hi, I'm Casey Decker. I'm a journalism student here. I'm a student in Professor Cesno's class.
Apologies.
You've been graded on this.
I think this was touched on a tiny bit a couple times, but I wanted to ask it explicitly. To what extent do you think that people in media are out of touch with significant portions of the American public?
That's a good question.
Ari, I think that's the best pitch that could come over home plate for you.
I think that's the core issue. And this is what I've been trying to get at, and I think this is why everybody in journalism missed that Donald Trump could, one, win the primary, and two, win the general. And why people were so shocked that this could happen. They must be missing something about this country. And I think the issue with so many journalists, they see things through a lens, like everybody does. Journalism school is not going to erase somebody's views. It teaches you to try to be neutral, but it cannot erase human nature. And I think the real deepest problem is baked into the cake. It's self-selection of who goes into J school and becomes journalists. And let me ask this audience a question. How many of you, raise your hand if you would consider yourself liberal on the left side of the spectrum? Of those who have your hands up, leave them up if you would consider going into journalism.
Well, you've got a totally self-selected crowd.
Smattering here. All right. Raise your hands of those of you who consider yourselves conservatives. Smallish number. And of those with your hands up, how many of you would consider going into journalism for a career? There's one over there. Yeah. I mean, this is my
Ari,
point.
there's a pretty aggressive,
Jim,
conservative
I'm not
press.
President Trump. Don't interrupt me.
I think I behaved myself pretty well during this.
My point here is your question is about whether or not people have an outlook that's reflective of one side, one type of thinking. And that's the core issue. And until journalism has more outsiders than insiders, more ideological diversity, I think it's going to continue to approach these issues that there's something wrong with Trump and we have to report what's wrong with him. And it's a bias I've seen my entire career as a Republican with the way journalists cover stories.
I want to say one thing because I need to do this. I disagree.
Of course.
No, not of course. Not of course. Whether liberal or conservative, if you are a good journalist, you are damn curious. And you question everything, including yourself. And you push yourself out of your comfort zone. And this is a problem that I think afflicts a lot in the media. I think it's a real problem. There are institutional biases within that they reassert and reaffirm the same story, the same narrative. And there are not enough rabble-rousers, conservative or liberal, who say, think of it differently. I'll just tell you one very quick story. It's an alma mater story, and the person I dealt with is gone, so whatever. I wanted to do a documentary series on General Motors, Saving General Motors, I wanted to call it. I was going to have access to the C-suite at General Motors, potentially. I thought it was fascinating. And I was told, Americans don't care about factories. Americans don't work in factories anymore. That's what I was told. Where did that come from? What did we lose out on? What kind of thinking is that? That is wrong thinking, that is red state, blue state thinking, and good journalists will push themselves, right? They will push themselves out of their comfort zone to say, who aren't we hearing from? And I don't think that falls it shouldn't fall along ideological lines for people who are good.
But hold on. Let me follow up on this, because I'm going to give you a specific example, and particularly on social issues. This is where you see the bias.
We're completely losing the lightning round here, aren't we?
All right, but
Yes.
here's how it works. Every president has had this Mexico City policy where if you're a Republican, you prevent abortion funds from being, taxpayer funds from being used to counsel abortion overseas. Democrats let it happen. Everybody runs on that promise and they sign an executive order. When President Clinton ran on that promise to allow funding, here's how he was covered on his first day in office. Peter Jennings. President Clinton kept a promise today on the 20th anniversary of the Supreme Court decision legalizing abortion. When Bush reversed what Clinton did, here's how ABC covered Bush. President Bush made anti-abortion conservatives happy today. Over at CBS with Dan Rather. Today, with a stroke of a pen, President Clinton delivered on his campaign promise. 8 years later, George Bush. This was President Bush's first day at the office. He did something to quickly please the right flank in his party. When Democrats do it, it's called honoring a promise. When Republicans do it, it's appealing to the right flank of the Republican Party. Why? Because this is the liberal mindset of most people, not all, but most people in journalism. They will tell you they are neutral and it doesn't seep through. I will tell you it seeps through every day.
No, let's go back to questions. Go ahead. I think a very important point, how stories are framed, the words that are used, the way the sides are portrayed, very important to be aware of.
Hi, and thank you. I'm a GW alum, and this question is about journalistic integrity along the lines with what Frank Sesno mentioned earlier about journalists and pundits on the same stage and so forth. The economist Asimoglu wrote this week in Foreign Policy about Western institutions that we are the last, quoting, defense against Trump was the title. The Kansas City Star reports that in December, right after Christmas, one of the individuals who was thought to be one of the contacts in the Russian dossier was killed. Do you see it as your job in the media to, for example, go out and look to see if these individuals who were in the dossier, for example, maybe the hotel staff, for example, are still alive or what their status may be?
In other words, to look into it on our own.
Exactly,
All right.
because we may not have,
Sure.
there may not be institutional incentives to look for them,
Jeff,
those
let me let
types
you-
of issues
Yeah.
in general.
I mean, I think it's our job as the media to report the truth and to report good stories. And yeah, I mean, I think if the fundamental question is, are we supposed to challenge what we're listening to and fact check and be skeptical and go out of our way to find out what the real facts are? Yeah, the answer is yes.
Thank you. We got about 7 minutes, so let's see if what we can get done here.
Alrighty. Hi, my name is Andre Gonzalez. I'm a current student here at SMPA. My question is, so just earlier with Sean Spicer, he said that, quote, the media must have basic facts right. They must get basic facts right. Then when Director Sesno asked him, well, what about these 7 facts that the administration has gotten wrong? He says, quote, we aren't perfect. To the journalists on the panel, is this frustrating for you to hear?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. I mean, we're going to be held to account if we make mistakes, no question about it. I don't know if I agree with the comment that Sean made that, you know, if it's a correction that we make, we put it at the bottom, and if it's the president or the White House, then we come out with pitchforks and torches. I think that's over-cranked as a criticism. And, you know, you could just talk to my old boss over at CBS News, Dan Rather. There was a very big problem with a story that they reported on Ari's boss, and it resulted in a huge upheaval at CBS News. And you know, Ari has been holding up these headlines showing coverage for Democrats and coverage for Republicans. I seem to recall, Ari, when George W. Bush was down at ground zero and had that bullhorn out, that the entire country was behind your boss at that point, including a lot of people in the news media. And he was not reported in this partisan way that you've been describing throughout this. So I just want to say that isn't entirely accurate. I think that, you know, there are Republicans and Democrats who work in the news media. They're colleagues of Frank and mine. I've known them over the years. I think we all, if you are at this level, you are striving to give people the news. Just do the news.
Let me take your question and put it to Ari in a slightly different way. Ari, forget the news media for a minute, if that's possible, but when you were the spokesman at the White House, did you feel that there was a higher standard that you were held to for truth and credibility?
Higher standard than what?
Higher standard than if you were anyplace else.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, sure, and it's healthy, frankly. This is where, as press secretary, my staff would give me something to say. I wanted to know where they got it from, because I wasn't going to say it if I couldn't vouch for it, and I knew the press would call me on it. So frankly, it's a good part of the process, because you should never take the podium and say something that's wrong. But on the same token, last week I did an interview with ABC News Nightline, and they were asking me about all the problems that Sean and the White House is having. And I referred to Sean's briefing on Saturday, which was the combative, contentious one, and then his briefing Monday, his first one where he took questions. And I said, if the White House dropped the ball on Saturday, Sean recovered it on Monday and ran for a first down. What did ABC News do? Split it right in half. White House dropped the ball on Saturday.
Really?
Yep. Now, I brought it to the attention of the executive producer of Nightline, and she handled it entirely professionally. Apologized, immediately corrected it on the web. The next night, Nightline corrected it on the air. But the question is, what was that producer in the editing booth thinking to even chop the quote? That's what bothers me.
And
They knew it was
But
wrong.
maybe that's a mistake of the head and not of the heart. Maybe it was a mistake in what they
Maybe.
did, not to put things through a partisan lens. Maybe it was just a bad decision.
Okay, and I will accept that, Jim,
Yeah.
if you will stop saying that Sean and the White House lie. If you apply that standard to them, that maybe it was a mistake of the head and not the heart. If you will do that, then I will accept what you said about Nightline.
I accept that. I accept that.
It was a very interesting
Progress
conversation.
tonight.
These words matter. Words matter. Next question. Thank you.
Hi, my question is, in times where you may have a personal opinion on an issue that you're reporting, how hard is it to maintain neutral when you're on camera or when you're writing for publication? And how careful do you have to be to ensure that people don't interpret what you're saying as perhaps taking a side?
Jeff?
A terrific question, and the answer is very careful. I mean, we are all human beings, and human beings have opinions. But I think when you work as a journalist, and certainly if you work for an organization that is committed to being neutral, then you have to be neutral, and that of course that's hard. But it's sacred. Sacred to me.
Beth?
I mean, I think you also have to sometimes place yourself in the shoes of the reader or the viewer and say, I'm going to pretend that, you know, I am a New York City super liberal person who lives like in Brooklyn, Park Slope, whatever. How would I see this story? I'm going to look at somebody who lives in what some people call flyover country. How do they see that story? And see, you know, what biases do they see coming out? Obviously, we work in incredibly fast-paced environment. Like, you would not believe how quickly sometimes editors want those stories. Jim can tell you how quickly you're doing reports on air. And sometimes that can be hard. And Jeff said, yeah, you're human, things come out. What I found really valuable, actually, and I recommend all of you do this, the Wall Street Journal has this great feature called Red Feed, Blue Feed. And it goes on and it shows you what your Facebook feed, for example, looks like if you follow conservative outlets or if you follow liberal outlets or other outlets, and you can go based off topic. And it is just so fascinating, especially in the last few days with this refugee stuff, to see what, if you live in, I don't know, deep red Texas and all of your friends are super conservative, what does your Facebook feed look like? And I think that for us living in DC and New York, that can be very illuminating and very helpful in that.
Okay, I think
you.
we have time for one last question. Sorry for the rest of you. Maybe you can gather later, but go ahead.
Hi, my name's later if you want to ask us.
He'll be around. He'll be around.
Hi, my name is Abiola Goro. I'm actually not a student at SMPA, but I come to all your events because I love it. And I'm actually from deep red Texas. And I know that since moving up here, things have been very different. The way people are treated, the way people think, and the way people perceive stories. And as you guys were talking earlier about how Donald Trump won because he got those smaller different demographics that weren't being represented, how does the media properly represent those demographics, and how is the media going to, or how should they try to, get out to the bottom of Texas and really, understand what those people think and sit in the bar and, get their opinions on things as opposed to being up here in the north?
Yeah, great question, Jim.
We've got to do a lot more of it. And I think one of the things that Donald Trump did very successfully during this campaign was he tapped into something that is going on in a lot of these rusting old Midwestern towns all over that part of the country. These cities and these towns have been hollowed out because the factories have closed and so forth. And he was onto something when he went to those voters in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin and said, "I hear you. These trade deals are wrecking your part of the economy." And I think the voters responded very favorably to that, and I think that's a huge reason why he's in the White House. In terms of covering minority issues and so forth, I think that we're really going to have to stay focused on what is happening to Latino Americans in this country, this wall that's being built on the border that the president initiated. And immigration officers go out and start looking at, picking people up and throwing them into detention and deporting them from the country. Are they going to be going after the right people? And, I think that's going to be a huge story going forward.
Ari, I want to give you the last word here. You co-wrote a piece in CJR, Columbia Journalism Review, with Mike McCurry, Republican press secretary and a Democrat press secretary.
Don't let that be the last word.
Okay, I'll let you respond to it. Okay.
But then I get a 30-second rebuttal?
That's fine.
Thank you for doing that. You see, how, this is why I love journalism. Holding you accountable. I want to ask you what the two of you think and agree on can be done, some of this is in the article and some of it's not, by both the press side and the press secretary side to get more and better information to the public. I don't actually, at the end of the day, much care. I mean, I do, but really, whether Donald Trump comes to dinner, where your office is, what matters is the public informed. What could we do better?
Well, what Mike and I together agreed upon as our recommendation was two things. One is take the briefing off of live TV. That it's become too much of a TV show. Mike was the one, Steve says no. Steve Scully from C-SPAN says no. So the answer is going to be no. Poor Mike is the guy, as press secretary to Bill Clinton, who allowed cameras in the room. They were never previously allowed. They were allowed for the first 5 minutes, but they were not allowed to cover the rest of the briefing. And Mike, when CNN was in its infancy and had a 24-hour news hole, allowed CNN to cover it. The idea of covering a briefing live was inconceivable. Nobody ever took a press secretary's briefing in its entirety live until the Monica Lewinsky story broke. And that was the first press secretary briefing ever covered live, and they all took it. But I think what's happened today has become a TV show. The press secretary postures knowing that the president is watching. Think about Sean having to perform for Donald Trump watching every day. And the press postures and peacocks knowing that their editors are watching, their colleagues are watching, and they have to ask really tough questions. I would rather lower the temperature and return to a much more serious substantive briefing where you can use it after the briefing's over embargoed, but it's not live. I think it will create more substance. Secondly, and this is what I think Jeff objects to strongly, is Mike and I proposed what we call democratize the room. Bring in different reporters to fill those 49 precious seats. That on Monday, for example, the current White House press corps, as it's currently constituted, covers the briefing. On Tuesday, it's business journalists. On Wednesday, it's foreign journalists. On Thursday, it's the .com world, where you could put liberal Think Progress right next to Breitbart and let those guys ask questions. On Friday, you open it up to reporters from around the country who may have Washington offices but don't usually come to the White House. So the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, the Las Vegas Review-Journal, the Sacramento newspaper, Bee. Sacramento Bee gets to have a seat in the room and ask questions, and you rotate it around.
What
That's
day of
what
the
Mike
week?
and I-
What day of the week do student journalists go?
Saturday.
That's the day they're going to want to go to work.
You'll be hungover, and it'll be very easy for the press secretary. I'm
Go ahead,
welcome your
Jeff.
reaction to it.
I think it fundamentally misunderstands what the press corps is doing, and and I have to say it surprises me that that suggestion came from two people who worked as press secretaries, because what happens if on Tuesday, when you've arbitrarily decided that it should be business journalists who populate the room, and North Korea launches a missile? Do you want the business journalists to make that their story? It's the same question about, and I think your point about whether they should be televised is one that reasonable people can have a discussion about. But I have heard one suggestion be, let's televise it Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and let's take it off camera Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Well, what happens if on Thursday is the day that the president wants to announce a Supreme Court justice nominee?
Or what if there's a terrorist attack or a natural disaster?
It's arbitrary, and it doesn't take into account how the news works. And so I don't think it would work.
Well, on the TV one, actually what we wrote is with only limited exceptions determined by the White House. So if there was a disaster, you just say, okay, no, today's a live day. But the point being, lower the temperature to have a different briefing.
Sounds like Artie's getting his revenge.
The point. Well, then say Mike too, Jim. And the point about the rotation, you make a valid point about reporters who are there every day have a much daily knowledge.
Because that's
but
their
it's
job.
also become a game of gotcha too much.
Yeah, but not for
that's the big part of the problem that we want to rotate.
But some actually have, and to take Jeff's point up, some have the institutional knowledge to know what happened yesterday and last week and 3 weeks ago. Yeah. Some have been covering North Korea regularly, so if North Korea does that, they have a knowledge. But not all of them. Okay. But they have a knowledge base.
You'll be there. You'll
but
get
I just want to be clear,
though. Associated Press. Yeah. Guys,
I want. Here, I'm taking the last word, I guess. I want to be clear that I, as a reporter, and certainly as president of the White House Correspondents Association, support having as many journalists in that briefing room as possible and giving them as many opportunities to ask questions. And Sean, in his first week plus of giving briefings, has called on more people in his briefings than his predecessor did in roughly the same time. And that's positive. But I don't think that shaking up the system in terms of deciding who sits where or arbitrarily deciding what group of journalists get to be present for a briefing is the way to go.
There's some really important things I hope you guys take out of this conversation. One is that everybody here cares passionately about what they're doing and why they're doing it, and everybody who's involved in this enterprise should care first and foremost about getting good, accurate, verifiable, credible information to the American public and to the world. Second, that there is work that both sides need to do to make it better. The media have terrible trust right now and cannot, in my view, just go about business as usual and just do their job, and we're not here to be popular, and so whatever. There's a price that gets paid when that credibility is lost. Similarly, if credibility is lost, I've called credibility the indelible ink of anybody who works at the White House, right? That's what you're remembered for, whether it's good or whether it's bad. All you've got is your reputation when you go in and when you leave. And that's something that matters tremendously. I hope that the temperature is turned down. It is not good for this kind of name-calling and ongoing sort of thing. President Trump just has to get over it. He is in the most criticized job on the planet. It's just going to be incoming all the time, whether it's from media or foreign leaders, or opponents, or members of his own party. You can't tweet and respond to every one of them, and you got to let some of this press stuff go. Push back where it matters. Call bureau chiefs and scream. Hold bad information out. But, you know, we need to move forward. To you, and I think this may be the thing that has changed the most. And Steve, I don't know how you feel, but the real transition of power has been from media and news producers to news consumers. You know where you're getting your information. How do you know whether it's any good? How do you know whether it's a reliable source? How do you know whether you're hearing multiple perspectives? That burden is now on the shoulders of every news consumer on the planet, really, right? Because you can click on anything. This matters. I think this has been a phenomenally great conversation with great questions. I want to thank Jeff Mason for his work at Thomson Reuters and also as president of the White House Correspondents Association. Hadass Gold, of whom we are so proud because she came through us and is now setting the standard for everybody and hold everybody here to account. Ari Fleischer for coming down from New York for this. It's been amazing. And Jim, who is a colleague and kind of a brave guy, and he's a little out there, and maybe he'll survive. So thanks to all of you. I will. I also want to thank Steve Scully and C-SPAN for being here tonight, and I hope we'll see you all back real soon. Have a good evening. Thank you so much.